This is Homefront Ethanol, and in today's video, I'm going to show you guys how I made this condenser out of parts from Home Depot. We are moving on to the two hardest parts of building this still. We have to cut and install our alcohol collection plate in this piece of copper pipe, and we have to wind the coils for our condenser that sits at the top of the still. So I've got 1/4 inch tubing and 3/8 inch tubing, and I'm gonna see what we can do. I've got 1/4 inch copper tubing in the freezer right now, as well as the 3/4 inch steel tubing that I'm gonna be wrapping it around. The reason the copper tubing is in the freezer is because I had to fill it with soapy water and freeze it in order to get it to bend as tightly as I need it to. This is my second attempt at winding this coil for the condenser, and the first time it didn't work. And I looked up online a few things. Some people say to fill it with sand, but one method was to fill the coil with soapy water and freeze it, and it should be able to bend in a lot tighter coils that way. As soon as I get that copper out of the freezer, I'm gonna have a limited amount of time to bend it. So as soon as I get it out here, it's gonna be a bit of a rush. We're going for an 8-inch coil. All right, you guys, this is the copper, fresh out of the freezer. It's frosty. All right, let's get to it. There's that soapy water coming out of the top. There we go. That's starting to feel like it should. Once you get down to the last few coils of this condenser, we're going to be compressing it together like a spring. It can be pretty hard. You do it little by little, and eventually it all looks like this. This is the condenser so far, and as you guys can see, it came out beautifully. Let's check the tape measure. It's about 8 inches long. It didn't come out perfect, but coming off the pipe here, could have came out a lot worse. That's my first time bending this coil, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. So for right now, this thing's going back in the freezer, and when it comes out again, I'm gonna bend this to return to our main water pipe. All right, you guys, this is the coil that we made for our condenser, and this is another piece of the condenser. This is commonly called a cold finger. I made it out of a 1/2 inch piece of copper tubing with a cap at one end. This is gonna fit inside of our coil. Water is gonna be hooked up to this side of this pipe. It's gonna travel down, and there's gonna be a hole drilled in this side of the pipe. That's gonna connect back into our coil to carry the water back out to the top again. But first, we need to make the piece of copper tubing that's gonna connect the end of this pipe to this coil. All right, we got some Milwaukee vice grips. This is fresh out of the freezer. We're bending this end to be perpendicular with the pipe. This is what I could come up with. I think it's gonna work. All right, it's about what I wanted. Next step, I have to bend this downward. While I'm at it, I might as well show you guys. I want to make this side more flat. I'm gonna grab it by the end and just take that little angle out of it. Looks good to me. Checking this against the cold finger, I think that's gonna work. I'm gonna cut off this crimped end and this crimped end and let all that fluid drain out and end up soldering this to this. I cut off the crimped end of the copper coil. The end of that coil is gonna plug into this hole in the cold finger. But before I do that, I'm gonna sand both sides and apply flux. I'm making this hole a different shape to hopefully accept this coil. The tricky part is not letting the drill catch it like a thread. It's about all I'm gonna get. We are down to the fun part on this condenser. Gonna unscrew the gas a little bit. This joint is gonna heat up a lot quicker than the last ones we did. I've got my solder ready right here. Test the joint with your solder. There we go. That got it good. Next step in building this condenser is adding the fittings. This right here is going to solder to the top of this 1/2-inch pipe. This is a compression fitting that is gonna go on the end of this 1/4-inch copper coil. And this will adapt that compression fitting to our 3/8 hose barb. Starting with the soldered fitting, and the first thing I'm gonna do is trim off this excess 1/2-inch pipe with this little pipe cutter. So I'm gonna flux this up and show you guys how it solders in. This has all the flux on it that it needs. This is gonna be a little bit tricky to solder just because it's gonna be hard to get my solder stick into that joint. But what I think I'm gonna do is hit it right there. And hopefully that solder will flow all the way around and make a good seal. Once again, you should probably always wear gloves while you do something like this. But I've just got some rags wrapped around it. I'm gonna focus my flame on the brass fitting, and by the time it gets hot enough, that 1/2-inch copper pipe will be hot enough to solder. There we go. I think that it might take more solder than usual. Now that I've got this fitting soldered to the top, I'm gonna move on to the compression fitting for the coil. This is a 1/4-inch compression fitting, and I'm gonna be using this crescent wrench to tighten it on. The first thing to go on is going to be this nut, so the threads are facing away from the rest of the line. The next part to go on is this tiny little compression ring. Goes right over that 1/4-inch copper. Take the final piece and line it up with those threads and just run it until it's finger tight. compression fittings, you're gonna need 2 wrenches or pairs of pliers. So I got baby crescent wrench and mama crescent wrench. I'm gonna put the small one on this small side of the fitting, just like that. I'm gonna turn this and hold it flat and come in with the larger crescent. These compression fittings only call out for a 1/4 turn. So I'm just gonna go 90 degrees and that's it. I think it may have just needed a little bit more. I don't think I did a full 1/4 turn. I hope that that is sealed up. It's still rotating. Wonder if it's supposed to do that. I'm tightening the fitting a little bit more, and it looks like it's gonna end up being more like a 1/2 turn in my case to get this fitting tight. But I think that's got it. Got a pretty good grab. All right, once you've got that piece compression fitted on, this hose barb adapter just screws in. The last thing that this condenser needs is the copper plate soldered to the bottom that's going to channel most of our condensation into our alcohol collection plate. So I'm going to cut that piece of copper out of the same sheet we have, and I've got this circle traced in the copper. I'm going to be cutting that with a multi-tool. Let's see how this goes. That went a lot better than last time. This thing is still very hot, but we pretty much got the shape we want. I'm gonna clamp it down in the center, clean some of this up, and then I'm gonna sand the whole thing down just with some sandpaper by hand. I'm not gonna show you guys that because it's gonna take a while. But after that, this is getting soldered to the bottom of this condenser. Well, that turned out pretty good. Got it pretty round with just the multi-tool. Probably won't take me as long to sand it up. This is the copper piece I have cut out, and it's gonna solder onto the bottom of this condenser. But before I do that, I'm gonna bend this and put a crease down the center of this piece, and that's to make it function more like a spout. I'm gonna be doing that with my large and medium-sized channel lock pliers. Ideally, you would do this in a vise, but I'm just grabbing it with these 2 sets of pliers, and I'm gonna bend it against my tailgate. I think that did it. This is my setup for soldering this piece. I've got a strip of OSB with 2 nails in it. Those nails keep this condenser from moving to the left. Our spout is zip tied to one of these nails, making it go straight up in the air. I've got my piece of copper in my channel locks with a zip tie around the handle. So this is how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna feed this in and back the compressor up on it until it hits the middle and it's got the angle that I wanna see, just about like that. In this next shot, I'm gonna show you guys how this all solders up. Comes the fun part. I've just got to hold this in the right place until that solder hardens. This is the finished product with the plate soldered on to the bottom of this condenser. As you guys can see, this plate isn't centered with the middle cold finger. It's centered with the profile of the rest of the condenser. I think that's gonna work just fine. I've got my spout facing the same way as my water out, as my water in actually. And that's just for a mnemonic aid, so I know which way to point this condenser so that this spout flows directly into our alcohol collection plate. That's all for today. I hope you guys had as much fun watching this video as I did making it. The channel is Homefront Ethanol. Please like and subscribe for more. You folks have a good one.